Former British Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn has been suspended from the Labour Party for purely political reasons. This all starts with the report from the EHRC, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is a state-sponsored agency. They say here, investigation into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party finds unlawful acts of discrimination and harassment. Now, it is no secret that anti-Semitism is an issue in British politics and is an issue in the Labour Party. I'm sure the report details a lot of that. But understand that what the EHRC focuses on is purely political. This is a purely political organization. And I will give you examples of that. Jacobin has a fantastic breakdown here. The Labour Anti-Semitism report has always been a politically motivated travesty. It's impossible for me to go through all of it, but before I even quote a bit of this, just a reminder here. Boris Johnson has a history of saying horrifyingly racist things. In fact, this is a top 10 list of horribly racist things that Boris Johnson has said. Yet the continued focus from the British media is on racism in the Labour Party or anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, as opposed to the obvious and overt racism coming consistently from the Tories. So this gets to the issue with the EHRC. The lawyer, Geoffrey Binman, former legal advisor to the Commission for Racial Equality, whose functions the EHRC took over when it was formed, has stated that EHRC wasn't given adequate resources and it has tended to pick and choose issues to tackle which are not necessarily the most important ones. When the EHRC published a report on racism in British universities in October 2019, it faced strong criticism for including supposed incidents of bigotry against white people and against English people at Scottish and Welsh institutions under its ambit. So, against white people. This was just last year. A report on racism at universities included incidents against white people. This is the same organization we are now entrusting when it comes to investigating anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Again, not saying that the claims here are untrue, but understand that what they are, the focus that they are given is purely political. And another example of that, I mean, this article goes deep. I will link to all these sources below the video in the description box. But they say here, in May 2019, the Muslim Council of Britain, MCB, asked the EHRC to investigate whether the Conservative Party has breached its obligations under the Equality Act by creating a hostile, discriminatory environment for Muslims as members or potential members of the party. The MCB submitted a lengthy dossier in support of its complaint, showing that the Conservatives had targeted Muslims in their election campaigns and allowed senior figures in their party, including its leader Boris Johnson, to make bigoted anti-Muslim remarks with complete impunity. It went on to list dozens of abusive comments by Conservative councillors, election candidates, and other public representatives. And they go on here. Essentially, the MCB issued a report 3 different times, calling on the EHRC to investigate this. They denied. They did not agree to investigate the obvious anti-Semitism, or I should say Islamophobia, coming from the Tories. So again, showing you this is a purely political organization. Despite the overt racism coming from the Tories, the EHRC refused to investigate them the same way they just investigated the Labour Party. Now, this gets to this whole issue. So after this report came out from the EHRC, Jeremy Corbyn put a statement on Facebook here saying, "My statement following the publication of the EHRC report." I'm going to read all this. It's not too long, but I'm going to read all this so you understand the complete context here. So he says, quote, "Anti-Semitism is absolutely abhorrent, wrong, and responsible for some of humanity's greatest crimes. As leader of the Labour Party, I was always determined to eliminate all forms of racism and root out the cancer of anti-Semitism. I've campaigned in support of Jewish people and communities my entire life, and I will continue to do so. The EHRC's report shows that when I became Labour leader in 2015, the party's processes for handling complaints were not fit for purpose. Reform was then stalled by an obstructive party bureaucracy. But from 2018, Jenny Formby and a new NEC that supported my leadership made substantial improvements, making it much easier and swifter to remove anti-Semites. My team acted to speed up, not hinder the process. Anyone claiming that there is no anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is wrong. Of course there is. And as there is throughout society, and sometimes it is voiced by people who think of themselves as on the left. Jewish members of our party and the wider community were right to expect us to deal with it, and I regret that it took longer to deliver that change than it should. One anti-Semite is one too many, but the scale of the problem was also dramatically overstated for political reasons by our opponents inside and outside the party, as well as by much of the media. That combination hurt Jewish people and must never be repeated. My sincere hope is that relations with Jewish communities can be rebuilt and those fears overcome. While I do not accept all of its findings, I trust its recommendations will be swiftly implemented to help move on from this period. So, this is a fairly innocuous statement. Completely harmless. Acknowledges the issue of anti-Semitism in politics, in the Labour Party, discusses the steps that were taken while he was leader, says it wasn't enough, and hopes to be able to see these recommendations implemented and move on from this period, and also discusses how, obviously, anti-Semitism was used as a weapon. This is my wording here, but it was used as a weapon against Jeremy Corbyn and socialists within the party, which is why it was quote-unquote overstated. Because if you look back, especially in the race in 2019, the amount of media coverage on Jeremy Corbyn and anti-Semitism, even though there were no direct connections there, you compare that to Boris Johnson, his overtly racist comments, the overt racism coming from the Tories, and the almost complete ignorance in covering that, it is obvious that anti-Semitism and the Jewish community as a whole was used as a weapon against Jeremy Corbyn and socialists. It is obvious that is what went on. That is what this fairly innocuous statement here, I mean, he's barely even touching on the issue because, again, he has to be so careful, but that's exactly what happened. The Jewish community were used as pawns to attack Jeremy Corbyn and socialists. But instead of the neoliberals being called anti-Semites for doing that, Jeremy Corbyn is the one that is called an anti-Semite. It's the entire debate. This is why if you can see, I'm very frustrated because the entire debate here is completely twisted. It is completely backwards. It doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. And if we go into, so this statement here, this is why he was suspended. That statement that I just read, that harmless statement acknowledging the problem, that's why he was suspended. The Guardian here. Labour suspends Jeremy Corbyn over EHRC report comments. Former leader suspended for saying anti-Semitism in party was overstated after a damning report. Overstated as a way to attack him and the socialists, which obviously is what happened. Unbelievable. It's unbelievable that the current leadership in the party, new leader Keir Starmer and his allies in the party, that they have been able to weaponize the Jewish community as a way to try and out socialists from the party. That is exactly what is going on. And instead of them being called the anti-Semites, it's Jeremy Corbyn. It is completely insane. And this goes to, I mean, this isn't the first action that has been taken from the current leadership against this wing of the party. Rebecca Long Bailey, who ran for leadership for Labour, was the candidate that was supported by former Corbyn supporters. She had tweeted out a criticism of the Israeli Defense Force, and because of that, she was sacked. She was sacked for linking the IDF to training. To police tactics that were used against George Floyd. Now, there is some questions as to whether police actually learned those tactics from the IDF. It has nothing to do with anything because the IDF is not Jewish. They have non-Jewish members. The IDF is a tool of the Israeli government. Israel does not equal Jewish. Jewish does not equal Israel. If you have a criticism of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, that does not mean you are anti-Semitic. That means you are criticizing the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. So the idea of tying these two things together, of being you're anti-Semitic if you criticize the Israeli government, is completely insane. Are you never allowed to criticize the Israeli government? How does that make any sense? But Long Bailey was suspended for this. Meanwhile, one of his allies here, Rachel Reeves, tweeted this out. This tweet is still up. She is discussing the first speech by a woman in the House of Commons was given by Nancy Astor, MP for Plymouth Sutton. This is a Nazi. Nancy Astor was a Nazi. This is a Keir Starmer ally here. Why wasn't she outed? If there is a zero tolerance for anti-Semitism, then why would you not sack the person who is praising a Nazi? Because it's not about anti-Semitism. It's purely about politics. Some reactions here, so I can settle the hell down. Ronan Burtonshaw here tweets out, Keir Starmer's intention is to drive the left out of the Labour Party. Neither the EHRC report nor Corbyn's mild response to it provide a basis for the suspension. Solidarity with Jeremy Corbyn. They're about to discover just how many supporters he has. I'm having issues even reading now. Z Squirrel here tweets out, Starmer just suspended Corbyn from the Labour Party. That's what happens when you spend 5 years trying to appease Blairite scum Fs who kept saying publicly that they would rather knife you in the front than the back. A literal quote from Labour MP Jess Phillips. And Z Squirrel goes on here to discuss what the lesson here is. That you cannot allow, in this case, Blairites or neoliberals within your circle once you have power of the party. That applies to the Labour, that applies to the Democratic Party, that applies worldwide. Jeremy Corbyn continued to, as awesome as he was, his fault was that he continued to trust people to the right of him. And all they did was work behind his back to undermine him. You cannot trust people that are going to ignore what the goal is here, which is to help improve society. You cannot continue to prop those people up within your party if they're simply going to undermine you and that project. Which is also why I discuss when it comes to the Democratic Party. The goal there is to take over the party, is to remove leadership, is to primary out people like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer. Because if you don't have control of leadership, there are serious limitations on what you're able to accomplish. But of course, that takes time. There's, real progress to be made there, and understand that there is progress being made, at least when it comes to the Democratic Party. When it comes to Labour, I imagine this party is not going to be able to form government for years to come. They're going to lose a lot of support because of this. One last thing here. Got to give serious credit to the Cavernacle. He is from the UK, has a great 10-minute breakdown discussing things that I referenced in this video. So check out his video here. Of course, he has firsthand knowledge, firsthand experience of living in the UK, and he understands this issue a lot better than I do. So check out his video. I'll link to it below. And otherwise, stay hopeful. Understand this is improving society for everyone is not an easy goal. There are going to be obstacles like this. There's going to be continued pushback, but they want you to give up. Understand, because they want you to give up is exactly why you cannot give up. The goal here is to help people. So if that's the goal, that goal never changes. Regardless of the obstacles in place, we have to continue fighting and doing what we can to improve society for everyone.